Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. This episode brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today at Roll20.net. Follow us on social media. We're at SWGM Podcast on Twitter, SWGM Podcast on Facebook. Go ahead and follow us on the YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, share. You can be found at youtube.com/Savage Worlds GM podcast. And finally, support us on Patreon, patreon.com/SWGM podcast. Tonight's topic, magic economy. It's a double entendre, kiddies. And here to discuss it with us, Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
Greetings and salutations.
And Dustin, the Savage Intern.
Feed me, Seymour, feed me.
If you're watching the live stream, feel free to participate in the open chat. We do have an intern in the form of Dustin that will be reading those and bringing them into the conversation. So what do we mean by magical economy? So let's go ahead and start the conversation off with a discussion of what the magical economy is. Why are we talking about magical economy tonight, Dustin?
Well, there are certain things that I've noticed in a lot of games. Magic seems to be very prevalent in fantasy-based settings, and I don't think a lot of GMs ever consider the idea of how much would that change things. Now, on Friday night, one of the members of my group is actually running Savage Drakenheim, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's sanctioned necromancy, meaning that a group called the Grey Society is allowed to exist in the city of Drakenheim. And one of the major complaints is necromancers that are sanctioned raise the dead to perform cheap labor and drive out all of your skill-based labor. It got me to thinking, well, wait a second. Why do you need doctors if you have healing potions? Why is it that magical items are so prevalent? Why is there a magic shop everywhere? What really happens to the world when everything is magical?
I would also add, too, if you're talking about a fantasy setting where magic exists, why isn't magic the cornerstone of the economy?
Right.
If you can do an incantation and create a pile of gold, then why would you have gold and copper pieces, standard currency, real world currency, or medieval currency for that matter?
Well, before we get into that, though, I mean, let's back that up a step and just look at what about the standard economy of a small medieval town when the adventurers roll in and drop a bag of gold flagons on the bar and literally buy out every service the town has available, spending more money than this town is going to see in the next 10 seasons in one night.
Right.
I mean, when you put that into context for a moment, and then you start talking about, well, what happens when you add in the ability to not need, healers because you've got magic potions, or, not need laborers because you can, raise the dead or make golems. When you start looking at all of those things, first you have to look at the economy of the world you're talking about to begin with. And the average fantasy game world is a fucking idiotic economy. Yeah. Where a loaf of bread should cost 10,000 gold florins in one town and 3 copper in, 5 towns over, because the 5 towns over, all their resources have been sucked into this one town where the adventurers are spending like mad, and it's scythed the land for miles in all directions of every resource.
So that brings up an interesting point there, Dave. You're right, it does. Now, what is a city government or a town going to do as a result of that? And I feel like for a lot of ruling, governing bodies, this is why magic would be illegal in most towns.
Well, I think you could absolutely go that route. If you're playing a more high Magic setting, though, I think you're going to see Magic is just going to be commonplace. Everyone's going to have a magical broom that sweeps their entire house all the time. It's just no one's paying attention to the 3 magic brooms that are moving about in the background of the scene. With that said, though, I think the more interesting aspect of it is, well, what if the governments go the other direction and they mandate that treasure found by adventurers must be turned over to the local authorities to be repatriated to whomever it was that lost treasure initially belonged to. And now instead you're paid a guild wage to be a treasure finder to bring the treasure back to the government to redistribute back out to the original owners. I think you have ample opportunity for both ends of that spectrum, as well as far-flung, even further ranging ideas, because once you establish the base economy, you can then start figuring out what Magic's effect is on it. But I think as a GM, if you're going to have a Magic economy conversation with your players, or even just in your world design, you first need to start with an economy discussion about your world and figure out, well, okay, what happens when a guy walks in with a coin that the innkeeper's never seen that's made out of a precious metal that, that innkeeper may not have enough change in the entire inn to break that gold coin.
Right. What if the system is actually built on a barter system instead of an actual hard currency? Because, I mean, a hard currency is pretty much, quote unquote, the coin of the land, right? It's something that arose out of feudalism as, this kingdom, here's our coin, and how we use as a basis of trade and currency.
We don't take florins here. That's the next city over, and we're at war with them. Get out.
Right. You even possessing them is an act of war within our city walls. Yeah.
It does open up a lot of plot threads.
So, I mean, if you're building a medieval fantasy world, a traditional Western fantasy, Lord of the Rings-ish type of world, then maybe small villages only work on barter and trade, raw goods. They can't even do anything with your money. It's like, what good is a gold piece? I can't eat it. I can't trade it with somebody else.
As much as I almost hate to say this, because I know where I'm going to get roasted for this in the comments, but you could go the Star Wars Episode 1 route. Republic credits are no good. No one around here will take Republic credits. Not me, not them.
Right, we're on the back end of space. We can't use those here. Yep.
You absolutely can run the gold coins aren't used, silver flagons are, kind of one hand washes the other as a GM to throw another obstacle in front of your players based on the reality of, okay, you just walked into town and you've got a bag full of diamonds. Why did you buy diamonds in the last 3 towns you've been to? Because diamonds are a lot lighter to carry a bag full of than the 10,000 gold pieces necessary to equal that 1 diamond. So you have a bag full of diamonds, but now it's time to pay for dinner, and all you have is a bag full of diamonds. Nobody there is going to take a diamond for dinner. Well, they'll take it, but it's certainly not giving you change.
Nope.
What am I going to do with your shiny rock? That doesn't do me any good. No, it's real pretty and all, Yeah, but no, we can't use that. Get the hell out of here. And then your party ends up washing dishes at the end for the next 3 weeks.
Well, and I think there's a multi-part problem that's kind of trickled down from 30 years of games being out there, 40 years of games being out there. One goes all the way back to the originals, where you've got, the dungeon loot was never really tallied. It was the faux reward while the GM tried to kill the player's characters in the dungeon crawl that was going on. And occasionally there was a useful item there, but it was like, here's this flagon that's worth 10 million gold. Why? Because it made the player go, oh, cool, I got a 10 million item. and then they moved into the next room and died. 2, though, is also the trickle down from video games. And I mean, let's be honest, we've all seen these games have an effect where all of a sudden your players want to loot everybody. And they for whatever reason, now your players want to cut out goat lizards, and they want to skin every bear. They want to cut the hide off of everything. They want to strip every piece of armor off of every kobold and goblin they sell, and then they show back up at town with their portable hole or their bag of holding. They turn the thing upside down and they dump more leather on the ground in front of the blacksmith than anyone in the town is likely to need for at least a decade. And now they're like, so you're going to give us 7 gold for each one of these because that's the price listed in the book. The blacksmith doesn't have that, nor does he need the leather you've brought him that reeks of goblin.
I feel like there's a certain point that a GM has to look at the players and in character say, I can't sell this crap. What's wrong with you? What am I supposed to do with these hooves? Bring me the animal they were attached to and we'll talk. Like, there is never any kind of haggling going on, and they have this unlimited fund. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but if you get down to it, there's a limit to how much you can squeeze out of a merchant. They do not have an unlimited supply. And at the end of the day, if you buy everything from them, like, they have nothing to invest. They have to sell all of that.
Well,
so really, yeah.
Let's look at the other end of this. When they do have the unlimited supply, the whole magic aspect of this, they could just walk in the back room and have their, pocket mage summon another 90 tons of gold that they can hand out to every bent who lobs a scimitar at them because, the Excaliburs are just falling out of every pond in the land. Every adventurer that walks in the door has the greatest sword that the king ever carried because they went and slayed the dragon up the hill. Because every adventurer slays the dragon at least once in their career, brings back the sword, and sells it. Okay, so the blacksmith has a rack of Excaliburs that his mage is performing alchemy on, and lead to gold is melting those things down, popping out all the gemstones, and turning it into these little ingots, and then pouring gold paint over them and handing it out to all your player characters.
I mean, like, if he had a mage in the back room that just made the gold necessary to pay off all of this crap you bring him, then I don't know, like, a flagon of ale would be $100,000 because you got to understand, if there's that much gold, it's worthless.
Well, think about this too. All right, why is he in business? To make gold.
Wait.
Hold on a second.
But doesn't he have a guy that?
But he basically has a
replicator.
I cannot believe I live in Vegas and I'm slot machine.
One-armed bandit?
Yeah, slot machine. He basically has a magic slot machine that just spits out gold coins. But he's in business to trade to make gold coins. What? Why would he ever open his shop doors? There'd be no point for him to be in business.
Okay, so I think we've pointed out the big pitfall. Let's talk about, possible solutions. And I think the very first one, again, throw it all the way back to the original games that came out years ago. Material components. What did it cost to make gold? Well, it cost a fuckload of other materials that were worth more than the gold you were going to make was worth.
Right.
Because you were using that to make the gold because you didn't have gold. It's not that you needed the value of the gold, but you didn't have the gold, so you made it out of all these other things magically. So you have to put in a material cost to Magic in order to keep that balance to a certain extent. Now, I'm not saying that's the only solution, but I mean, certainly if you're going to go the spell components route, spell components are expensive.
Right. Well, I think you also have to ask yourself too, what's the purpose of having an economy or resource management in your game? because a lot of that game wise is just hand waved, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, you have 10,000 gold pieces. How much does it weigh? Who gives a shit? Here's a bag that's a portable dimensional portal. Shove it in there. I don't give two shits. How much does that weigh? I don't care. You have 10,000 gold. Enjoy. Well, how much does this sword cost? Oh, it costs 8,000 gold. Wait a minute. That seems overly inflated. Who gives a shit? You got 10,000 gold. Mark it off and get the goddamn sword. Let's move on. So the question then becomes, how do you handle resources in your game? Do you track resources? Is that not important for you? You got to kind of take that into account if you're going to be talking about an economy, right?
Fortunately, Jared, I know you know the answer in my game. We don't use money in my game. It's assumed that every adventurer that walks through the door can pay for a sandwich and a flagon of ale at the end. It's assumed that they've got money on them to pay for these services.
Right.
Because, one, I don't want to get bogged down with a player who's going to track the weight of all the loot they try to drag back to town. And I've had games that literally bog down for a half an hour while they kibitz among each other what piece of loot is going to be the most valuable to them and gets that last slot on the sled that the mule is dragging back to town. So I just gotten to a point where I don't track it. But I think to a certain extent that is also much as because I've done that work and don't want to continue to do it on a regular basis.
Right. Well, it's also too the thing about cinematic approach to gaming, right? We don't focus on the mundane moments of you sleeping for 8 hours and roleplay 8 hours of you sleeping because that's not thrilling. I'm not going to sit there and go, okay, so the first hour of your sleep passes. Give me a sleep roll. Let's see how well you're doing. No, you slept for 4 hours. Great. You slept for 8 hours. Great. We might do one of these things. You slept in full plate armor? I don't know. Give me a vigor roll. Let's see how well you slept. But that's pretty much the extent of it. You don't role play the bathroom moments, the personal hygiene moments, the boring, mundane, day-to-day shit. It's just assumed. All that takes place off screen. So, I mean, you could take the same approach to, money in your game or resources in your game like ammo, ammunition, things like that, unless it becomes important. So, but if you're going to have a conversation about the Magic economy or economy in general, you kind of have to ask yourself, how much of this conversation do I want to invest in it? Do I really need this for my game? Is it going to be an important aspect of the game? Now, I would argue this. Understanding what the economy is an important part of world building, even if you don't track resources in your game. It'll give you a more three-dimensional, well thought out world if you don't hand wave that as part of world building. But I digress. Sunset Sam has something up there if Dustin wants to.
Sure thing. Sunset Sam. Magic is so prevalent, I always wondered why it wasn't used like technology was used to build public service for profits or not. Magic-powered trains, cities, streetlights, and hospitals. And I think he's got a really good point because if technology gets so advanced, it's indistinguishable from magic. So why not have everybody be a mage?
Well, I think one, I mean, obviously the obvious answer to why not have everybody be a mage is because it's boring as fuck. Two, though, and this is more important, take a look at some of the most revered fantasy products out there, whether we're talking Lord of the Rings. Magic is actually very scarce in Lord of the Rings world. We see a lot of it because we're looking at the chosen heroes of an entire generation who are going off. But when you actually go back and watch The Hobbit, there's 3 magic weapons displayed apart from Gandalf's staff. There's some really good armor. There's there's a lot of gold pieces that are swung around, but the armor, the weapons, etc., that are displayed in The Hobbit have no magic to them. There's a couple of elven blades that have a little magic. And even then, it's not a +1 sword. It's like a sword that glows blue around orcs. That's it. That's the extent of magic in the Lord of the Rings world.
I mean, you pretty much like get around your arch nemesis and it botches your stealth roll.
Right. Well, you look at it too, like the most powerful magic item in the entire world makes you visible.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have something like the Forgotten Realms, or even, dare I say it, Azeroth from World of Warcraft, where literally you have entire cities that float in the air, or you have Luskan in Forgotten Realms, where it's an entire town of nothing but magicians, and they have elevators that are powered by magic and brooms that are powered by magic. And in these worlds, magic is so common, it does take on that role of technology. A Roomba is instead a magical broom that sweeps through the house. A subway train is instead the tram that's powered by, goblin dust or whatever, and shoots across, underneath a lake. You have these amazing things that are absolutely powered by magic within those worlds. And if we're going to talk specific to Savage Worlds, I mean, Deadlands does this with Ghost Rock.
Mm-hmm. There's a viable explanation as to why there is magic. It's science. And I think that one of the things that we overlook a lot of times, I don't know if all the GMs do it, but I have seen a lot of GMs overlook the legal aspects of, you can't do that in plain sight. You can't just throw cards and blow stuff up and not expect a ranger knocking on your door. Like there's been like this issue. Like I want to point something out, that if you did that in the real world, there'd probably be people with torches and pitchforks showing up at your door because you've done something that is dangerous.
Well, I mean, a classic example of that, probably the most classic example of that, is Frankenstein, where the entire mob shows up because you've done the magic of bringing back to life from the dead. And now you have an entire group of people who show up to burn your house down and kill you and destroy the thing you've created because you've made this unholy union. Or the Salem witch trials, where the suspected magic user is burned at the stake for fear of what magic could do.
Yep. That was one party gag gone horribly wrong. For those of you who don't know, what happened is that for the Salem witch trials, there was a slave by the name of Tituba. And some of the girls were having a party, and they asked Tituba about like magic from her place. So she said, yeah, you can like pour a bowl of water and crack an egg and you can see your husband's face in it. So they tried it as a party trick. And then they started hallucinating, and everybody thought, oh my gosh, there are witches here. We have to start burning the place down.
Right. It was one big bad LSD trip.
It was, yeah.
From the bread. Yeah.
It was really, yeah, that happens too. Like, people get paranoid. Literally just a bad party joke turned into a massacre.
Well, I think it's what the Solomon Kane Savage World setting, the Savage Worlds of Solomon Kane. Magic in that, you have to like chop off your hand.
Right.
There's like a real like flesh and blood price to be paid to wield magical power. And it comes to like really, really high consequence as well.
One of my favorite settings of all time from D&D was always Dark Sun, because in that, the use of magic is destroying the world. You know, it's destroying the water content of the world, but it's destroying the world for all intents and purposes. Therefore, only the most powerful are allowed to use magic, and then they're expected to only use it for the appropriate purposes. But I think that is it's the first question you really have to ask yourself when you decide I'm going to include magic in my game is, at what tier does this magic fall in? Are we talking, a low magic Conan or Lord of the Rings, or are we talking a true high magic, floating cities and all of that? And then once you've determined the amount of magic, then start thinking about, well, what impact does this have on the world? Are there, is there a magical trebuchet that you sit down in and it launches you from one city to the next with a magical pillow to catch you? Or, Pegasi that fly you through the air on command because every town has a stable of Pegasi waiting.
Or a series of mirrors that work like a subway system where you step through one mirror on a certain time and arrive at another mirror on the other side of the planet at a certain time, like a subway station. Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's hospitals, whether it's healings, whether it's guild controlled, is it government controlled? Is it government sanctioned?
I'm going to point this out. I think it would be government sanctioned and government regulated no matter what, because it's the issue of controlling what the people can do. And if the people can shoot lightning out of sticks, I'm pretty sure they're going to take away our sticks. I mean,
no. Oh no! I think you're really reaching there. Very much
that protects wands. You
right?
Government seize the wands of the mages of the.
You have to fill out an application, pay a small minimal fee, and wait 2 weeks.
But listen,
background check.
When the Grand Wizards Council wrote that, they did not have assault wands back in the day. They had simple light staffs.
And then you remember the MRA,
the MRA, Magic
Rights Association,
right?
And you lobby with the king to get more, less strict wand controls in place.
Oh my god!
Another great fantasies way of handling magic was Discworld, where the more powerful the magic was, the more space it took up in the user's brain, and the more metaphysical, scientific leverage that person's willpower and brain had to be able to exert on reality to be able to move it and pull off that spell. Otherwise, your consciousness and brain would just be flung out of your body when you tried to cast the power. So I mean, there's absolutely other directions you can go to balance this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the point of, we can't give you a one-size-fits-all balance as much as say you must find a balance, or sooner or later it throws your game out of rhythm.
Right.
Let's and I've heard this talked about pretty extensively. Let's talk about the D&D adventure where the players have a bag of holding and in which they've thrown every piece of loot they've ever gotten, so that the next time they come against anything you throw at them as a challenge, they reach into the bag and pull out the +5 Avenger of blah 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 slaying specific to whatever you've just set in front of them, because they've got one of everything in this bag of holding they've been throwing in there for the last 10 years of your adventure. If you allow that to happen as a GM, you've created your own problem. You have to think far enough in advance to not set yourself into that problem. The GMs who say, well, what do I do when? Well, the answer is, don't ever give them that if you don't want them to use it. If you can't challenge a character with that thing, don't allow them to acquire it.
I would say that single-use items become a lot more prevalent than multi-use. I would say hold on to, give them something that they have to hold on to rather than something they can use at will.
Well, the other thing you can do too, okay, so since we're on that topic, real quick, yeah, you can put so many charges of Featherfall on their boots, not tell them and track it and watch them walk off a cliff to their death. A lot of fun for the GM. Not so much for the player. Like you fucking dick. Hey, you never took it to a magic shop to see if it was charged. Oh, you never. Oh, or the cursed item that you put on your finger, and now you're chaotic evil, or the opposite, or you. Oh, now you're an ogre. What?
Yeah.
All of that is a very passive aggressive way to deal with the original problem of, damn, I shouldn't have let them find this treasure trove of magic items.
Right.
Because now I can't challenge them.
And I don't want to get too far off on a tangent here, but who exactly is sitting around making all these belts that change your gender, or the rings that turn you into an ogre, or the daggers that are only capable of killing your own father? These
the Tumblr mages.
Who's going around making them?
Tumblr mages make them.
Yeah. So, I mean, it becomes a point where I've heard this posited as an option too. Anything of great power is an intelligent, trapped, archaic, weapon that is now part of a character. So, like the ring in the Lord of the Rings, the more you use it, the more it changes your personality, the more it tries to force you back towards Sauron, the whole 9 yards. Oh, you become visible to all these threats. You become invisible to the world, but highly visible to all these evil threats that want to possess that ring and get it. I guess that's okay. But I mean, the thing is, you kind of have to, before you even get to that point, what Dave is saying is, and I agree completely, is you have to start at zero and go, what impact does magic have in this world? Are there 10,000 magic swords or just 3? And how powerful are these 3? What is the lore behind how they came to be? Or are they just masterwork weapons that give you the +1?
I think kind of playing off of that, Far Sniper and Sunset Sam, they have 2 different points, but they kind of tie into that. Like Far Sniper says, what about a world where there are 2 factions of magic users? So wouldn't that be the case?
1 magic users, 1 non-magic users.
Well, that's what Sunset Sam is talking about, non-magic users.
Right.
But Far Sniper is talking about, wouldn't magic users break off into different factions? Wouldn't you have the illusionist and the
Far Sniper actually is the one who said he's going to have a faction and the players choose to be part of either the magic faction or the non-magic faction. And Sam's asking him, what would the non-magic faction have to counter it? Well,
technology.
There's a great YouTube video out there that talks about the development of glass and the development of porcelain between the Western society and the Far Eastern society, and how there was far less glass found in ancient Oriental and Pan-Asian areas because their technology tree developed into ceramics while the Western side developed into glass. And that technological difference is akin to the Western mages were able to summon fire from their fingertips, while the Eastern side created the flint and steel and brought on like the propane lighter because they needed the same ability, but they found it a different route. The non-magical faction is going to find a non-magical way to do the same thing. Your mages can throw fireballs. Your non-magical guys push giant bales of hay down a hill and set them on fire with pitch. And they throw a much bigger rolling, tumbling fireball at you.
This is effectively the argument of, if anybody's playing Savage Rifts, the coalition state versus the Federation of Magic. Why would you choose one or the other? Well, I don't know. You got one group that's a bunch of homicidal, fascist technocrats, and then you got a guy that sacrifices the innocent to remain young forever. Decisions. I don't really like that coalition state. They're a bunch of jerks. They attack all these innocent people. I'm going to go talk to the Federation of Magic. Okay, I'm slowly backing out of this territory.
So I mean, you can absolutely go that route, but you have to think about it logically. what happens in a world where there's a guy who can place his hand on you and you regrow whatever was damaged on your body? Well, that world never develops herbal medicine, never develops surgery, never develops medical procedure. This idea of having to live in a clean environment. The reason people don't live in their own shit is because people were getting sick and dying from living in their own shit. It's got nothing to do with wanting to be clean. I'm here to tell you, in the ancient days, even the royals who walked around on rose petals shat in the corner on a little pot and left it sit in the room with them until the next day when the peasants showed up to take out the night soil.
So I got to throw something out there. In a fantasy world where you can teleport and have a portal open to another world, here is your plot seed. The sewer system leads into a very angry dimension where they are sick of humans' shit. Literally.
Well, like different direction.
See, I had no idea the discussion of magical economy was going to go to potty humor. All right,
I'm just saying there would like if a hole opened up in my personal realm and all of this flowed through for thousands of years, I would learn some kind of magic to just go through and plug up that hole in one capacity or another.
And that's where you start the adventure in your world. The hole has been closed. Our own world is overflowing in its own shit. What do you do?
Obviously, this is the point where we do a social conflict about trade agreements.
Welcome to the Brown campaign. Wow. All right. So I think we've hit that point of the conversation and talk about magical economy where we're talking about how do you structure the economy of your magic? How prevalent is it? What are the costs associated with it? Sort of like a Benny economy. What effect does it have on your game? How do you manage it? I think what Far Sniper is kind of presenting here is a magic versus black powder type society. Two different societies, magic versus black powder.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, with something like this, the biggest thing is to think about is start thinking of anything that they can do with magic. And then what thing do they not need to be able to do because of it? And who would feel slighted by that? Who would feel controlled by that? You know, are there governments that have control of it? Or are all governments now a feudal system where because they were born a certain caste or a certain class or a landowner, they remain a landowner? That there's no societal movement because when there is no wealth, because everybody has magic, then everyone just remains the same. You know, that's the other thing is if you look at the way societies are structured in the real world, whether we're talking communism, socialism, capitalism, each of those things and the amount of resources available led to the wars. They led to the scientific discoveries. Those things should be reflected in your game world based on who has access to the best ley lines. That kingdom's going to be more powerful than the other kingdoms. You know, who has access to the vast graveyards and the mud monsters and whatnot. And if your character is one who summons, say, golems to do all their work, is it as good as a skilled carpenter can do? Or is there a difference where now you've got all basic work is cheap because it can be fueled by magic, but now you've got artisans that are charging thousands and thousands of silver because you need their ability to do a light tap of the hammer instead of just a crack.
I mean, let's be honest. I'm not really sure if I trust zombie labor.
Worked in Shaun of the Dead.
It does.
There's a bit of George Lucas still bothering me with details, hand waving that goes on when you're talking about that, but you know, it's good for a sight gag.
But so let's talk about the other Magic economy. Maintaining a game in which your players have power points and how often they get them, how much they use them. Do they have to eat to maintain their health to be able to continue to regain them? Do they have to sleep at regular intervals? Are there things they can do like meditation that allow them to regain them more quickly? Are there drinks they can imbibe or foods they can eat that are enriched, or sites they can go to where they draw water from this well that sits on a ley line and they splash it over their bodies and are regenerated more quickly? You have to start thinking about these other things that are going to happen, because if there's this resource and it's called PowerPoints that my character innately has access to, my character is innately aware of everything they can do to manipulate that and get more oomph out of it.
Mm-hmm. So let's give some examples of how you pull that off Savage Worlds wise. You can decide that, if you're running a high magic setting, would you allow player characters to take more power, the power points edge, more than once per rank? Well, we're talking about a setting where it's a high magic setting.
See, and I think there is an option to do so, but that option is tempered by what impact does it have on ammunition rates, or the more mundane versions of those things. You know, if the magic user can take power points with every advance, or twice a rank, or whatever, can the archer carry an extra quiver that has a lighter version of the arrows so that they can carry twice as much ammunition for the same weight? Or, what's the offset to make sure that you're not making it overpowered while giving into this high fantasy, turn it to 11 and break the knob off mentality? I think you have to balance any tweak you make there with other tweaks to the rest of the world.
Well, let's talk about like one of the most common power. One of the most you'll find this in the Savage Worlds core rules as well, is the no PowerPoint setting, where basically however many PowerPoints it costs to cast the power from the book, divide by 2, round down. In some situations, you're not spending any. You're not taking any negatives to rolls on some powers that are just 1.
And if you have the wizard edge, then you are definitely doing a lot better in a no PowerPoint system.
So, but what effect does that have on this? Is that fair and equitable if you're considering magic to be the same thing as gun bullets or ammunition?
Well, are the guns going to explode in your hand if you roll double ones?
In my world, they will. But, I'm a dick GM.
Well, the offset is, and I've said this before, you also have to be careful about doing a 1-to-1. There's more magic points, therefore there's more arrows, because at the same time, the arrow guy didn't dedicate an advance to get more arrows. It doesn't cost him an advance to get the second quiver. It just costs him a little extra dosh at the shop.
Well, at the shop where they have like the mage that transmutes everything into gold, so you just take it back there and be like, hey, can you turn these into gold arrows? I want to pay the dragon from a distance.
Well, you could also say if you have a certain trapping for your magic, let's say, for example, it's cold, or it's dark, or it's fire, or it's light. When you're in any one of those environments that is similar to the trapping, you refresh power points at twice the regular rate.
Oh,
so if I'm an ice mage, my power points and I'm in the frozen tundra, my power points regenerate at twice their normal rate. The second I step into the desert, oh fuck me.
Now
oh,
they're
God.
half the rate.
Right.
Well, if you're going to do that, why not have natural enemies? I mean, think about it. Aren't the elements natural enemies of each other? Wouldn't any ice mage have a problem with a fire mage and vice versa?
Maybe. And I mean, that's all about world building and what works for your system. But I think at the very minimum, they need to be, the ice mage throws an ice ball at the fire mage. Well, fire and ice are, opposites, and maybe there's some resistance and some, penalties there. His fire shield might really have a much stronger impact on those icicles you're launching at him.
I had a friend one time tell me that the best type of magic was ice magic. He said, because here's what you do. You throw icicles at everybody, or you make it rain hail, or you just freeze everybody. So pretty much, I think mechanically for Savage Worlds, that would be bolt, blast, and ensnare.
Yeah, until you meet a fire elemental.
Right.
Or a wind elemental.
Or you go the other direction, and the next thing the party faces the abominable snowman who's immune to all cold.
And he looks at the ice mage and he picks him up and he says, I'm going to love him and I'm going to pet him and I'm going to call him George.
Uh-huh.
And like the abominable snowman looks at the rest of the party, says, I'll let all of you go if you let me keep him.
Because he's cute.
Except the player who's been throwing fireballs at everything, you put him up against a fire elemental who every time they throw fireballs at it, it's a healing roll against that target.
Like literally the monster now wants to keep the mage because he can attain immortality thanks to this one mage.
But with that said, I think there's a more interesting aspect to this idea of the trapping has an effect, and that is Savage Worlds, yes, absolutely has 8 or 10 trappings listed in the book. But it also gives the onus to the GM and the player to create their own. So all of a sudden, your player who's going around casting bolt, and it's the ubiquitous Scott W. example of they open their mouth really wide and a stream of bees comes out. Well, all of a sudden, that power in a no PowerPoint setting has this guy like machine gun spitting bees in every encounter, and suddenly there's a plot point that comes up of the giant swarms of killer bees that have been unleashed in the city. I mean, there is a certain point where you have to go, what does the cumulative effect of all of that magic being used in an area have? Does suddenly magic break in that area where, so much of it's been used, the air snaps and you now have wild magic where they tried to do a bolt and now you roll a die to see who the bolt hits. Or, all of a sudden you roll a die to see what trapping it gets.
Or you have Deadlands where you have the fear levels, and the more magic you're using, the worse they get. People are afraid of magic.
Oh, they should be.
Yeah, so we're talking about, okay, we're in... Like, if we're playing Deadlands Reloaded, I'm not going to lie. The fear levels in Deadlands Reloaded are lethal. Because if you have a -2 on a monster, and the fear level is 2, you're rolling a -4, and then you have to roll a fright table. I've had more of my players die from heart attacks than Kraken attacks. Like, you throw, like, a sea dragon out there, they're like, no problem, I'm going to shoot it in the eye. You, like, put a little creepy-ass ghost with a -2 fear penalty just whooshing by. Ah! Fall over dead.
Well, I mean, you could also say, hey, magic in your world is a law of entropy. It's a circuit. It's a enclosed system, and when you tap that magic, you have to pay that energy back,
right?
Somehow, and that could be cast a spell, lose an advance.
Or if you really want to get nasty about it, give somebody an arcane background and tell them they can only refill their power points if they kill somebody.
Right. Or the blood magic thing that, you have to spill blood.
Mhm.
Well, you can go a couple routes with blood magic. Blood magic could be you have to be a member of a particular family to have access to magic, and then it's a card draw during character creation to see who has access to arcane backgrounds at all. You can go the route where you actually have to fuel your powers with blood. Dustin's talking about you have to kill to regen power points. What if power points, here's a really interesting idea. I challenge one of the listeners to do this, record the game and send it to us, or come on the show and get to talk about it. Multiply the number of power points the player gets by 100. But they have to take the edge to get them back. It's a use it and lose it. You never regen power points ever. But you can buy, once a rank, you can buy another pack of here's another 100 power points.
That's interesting. I would also say, too, that if you wanted to run the blood magic thing, that your power points only regen when you cause yourself a self-inflicted wound.
Yeah. You have to take...
That you can't soak. So what you do is you take the dagger, you stick it into yourself, you cause an actual full wound that you do not soak, and that refreshes your power points.
No damage roll, no soak roll. It's automatically you stick it in and cause a wound.
Right. And you have to keep that because the
for
pain...
5 days. Yeah.
Yeah. The pain is what is giving you access to the power. And here's one of the things... So in some of the settings, there are actual like deities that you can call upon or you can work with, but they have different flavors for them. What if you have to maintain that sort of code of whatever deity you're pledged to? Like, okay, let's say you're pledged to a benevolent, kind-hearted. You have to take the heroic hindrance. You have to help
with
anybody that needs it.
Points for it.
No additional, because that's what your deity does. Okay, what if your god is the god of wine and revelry? You have to drink. You have to take the major habit hindrance,
Your character has to get sloshed at every town they go to.
And you got to role play it out. And maybe you take a level of fatigue because you're always plastered. We're talking about like there are systems out there where in order to get access to magic, you have to go through a painful ceremony and have a permanent level of fatigue. And that kind of works, Yeah,
but like we said too, it all depends on your type of game, right? If you're running a high adventure, high fantasy, high magic kind of setting, and you just look at PowerPoints like ammunition, who gives two shits? No, they just, you know what? They never run dry. How about that? They never run dry because I'm not forcing the other guys to count their ammo.
Yeah. And there's a setting rule I've seen played one time where it's the combination of no PowerPoints and the spend additional for effect. And the spend additional for effect is you still tracked PowerPoints. You still recouped PowerPoints, but you spent them to amp the power up. So you could cast Bolt normally with just the normal minus penalty for the number of PowerPoints, but you could also spend the extra power points from your pool to turn it into the 3d6 version. So now I make the dice roll for the 3 separate bolts, and I spend the power points from my pool, and I've just cast 3 3d6 powered bolts. Or all 3 of them had my fire trapping activated so that they have that chance to ignite whatever they hit. You put those costs on that PowerPoint pool and leave the no PowerPoints edge to handle the normal usage of it. This gives you that high magic feel, but still gives your players the ability to have a little more customization in how their characters are more powerful, and leaves a limiter on it. It was an interesting setting role that was it's like a semi PowerPoints instead of no PowerPoints.
And I would highly recommend if you're GMing a game in Savage Worlds where the players are going to be using PowerPoints, please come up with a separate stylized Benny that you can hand them to something physical and tactile that they can see and touch and spend like bennies instead of marking off tick
Yeah.
marks on a character
Tick
sheet.
marks on a piece of paper suck.
I'm gonna go ahead and bring it up, and it's something that we've covered more than once.
You're gonna grab that comment out of chat.
Vancian magic.
I was gonna touch
right.
it in a minute anyway.
Let's talk real simple. I'm gonna jump in here because the simplest implementation of Vancian magic is as follows. You spend your PowerPoints in advance. Go ahead.
Yep.
If there's a variable cost to the PowerPoints, for example, wall, I don't think it's called force. It's the wall barrier, the barrier power, where each PowerPoint allows for another expansion in height or width. If you only have 3 PowerPoints set aside for barrier and you need extra, start applying the no PowerPoint setting for any variable PowerPoint. So that's the easiest way to do Vancian magic. I'm sure there's other examples. I know Richard Woolcock has this very complicated, layered, probably very, very excellent Vancian magic system. Go check out his website. I'm for Xandamar.
Yeah,
Xandamar.com.
So. Let me take a look. I'll search it.
Because it's like Xandamar or something like I can't remember exactly. I know it starts with a Z. But
Dagmar.
I don't think that's the site though that he has all of this on. I think he's got a separate site with like all the editions he's written up for Savage Worlds.
I'm sure you can find a link from his main site though, right?
Zagmar, Savage Stuff, savagestuff.blogspot.com. And I'd like to actually thank Richard for continuing to put this stuff out for free. It's pretty cool of him. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
You could also...
He has an interesting thing on how to create weapons in using Savage Worlds as a baseline, how to do specialized magical skills and mixing and trappings. He's got some interesting stuff.
Yeah, and he's got some good information if you want to put out your own fan bits. There's some information on how to like plot out a campaign and to use Scribus or other issues to like work with layout, some of the nuts and bolts. So, and he's been gracious enough to put that out for free. So
I will say that if you read his posts and they come off as almost a little on the pretentious side or a little on the logic heavy or numbers heavy side, the material he publishes isn't that way. It's very much professionally written. He knows exactly what he's doing when it comes to that. The posts he can put up are worded very differently from the stuff he actually releases as a product. So even if you don't find that you like Richard's point of view on things, the material he's put out there is actually pretty good. Right. So with that said, though, the Vancian thing, I guess at the end of the day, my problem with Vancian aside, the big issue for how you would balance Vancian magic is all built into Vancian magic. We don't need to give you any tools for how to balance that in the economy of your game. Vancian magic has a built-in balance system. It's a built-in economy system for itself that limits it. That's the whole point of Vancian magic, is it comes with a fuckload of limiters and balance points to the power of what it's capable of doing. And I think that by itself is a great example of what we're saying you need to do when you add magic to your world. It doesn't have to be Vancian in flavor. But design-wise, we're telling you to go that route. We're telling you, make tweaks to the way magic works in your game so that there is a balance point.
Right. Well, so for example, you could say you could do the Deadlands route too. So let's talk real quick about the Deadlands. Deadlands has almost all the arcane backgrounds that Deluxe has. However, they're renamed and slightly tweaked and retooled. So the Miracles arcane background at Deadlands is called the Blessed. The power list is limited. You don't have access to any power in the book when you take the blessed, or no, you do. You have access to any power in the book, but you don't have power points. You have to pray to call down. So it's almost like a no PowerPoint setting of version of the Arcane Backgrounds Miracles. The old ways also Deadlands has that miracles background feel to it, because now you have, the old ways. You must honor the old ways, or that's considered a sin, blah, blah, blah. But even the, and I apologize, I'm not way up on my Deadlands. Help me out here, Dustin. The card slingers.
Hucksters.
So hucksters have very specific set of powers with very specific trappings about what they look like and what they're called and what they do and what they look like when you cast them, and they're all dealt around cards.
And the best drawback that I've seen in any Savage product for Magic, it's illegal.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
You get caught doing it, they will.
Illegal in all the towns, it's illegal morally. They're playing cards against a demon for their soul to be able to do these things. It is absolutely the single best. Oh my God, you sold a piece of your soul to the devil for what you can do. Kind of, here's your balance points.
Right. So don't overlook a narrative balance versus a rules mechanic or mechanical balance. Because if Magic is illegal,
hey, the Rangers got a saying: you either shoot it or you recruit it. So that's your choice. They're either going to fill you with hot lead or put a 10-star on you.
Right. Well, and here's the other thing too. Like if every time you go to cast Magic, you have to cut a knuckle off of your finger. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to
so many.
Cut a knuckle off your finger. When you run out of fingers, then you have to lose an eye or cut your tongue off in order to cast Magic. The guy that you meet that is blind and mute and is missing all the fingers in one hand, you should shit your pants the second you see that guy.
Right.
Like, oh God, oh shit.
Well, and I think the best part about Deadlands is if you're going to create a world for your players to play within, Deadlands is an amazing point by point. Just turn that book, and every chapter that's in that book, follow it and design a world that answers those same questions. If Deadlands tweaked it from Savage Worlds, so should your setting. And just use that as a roadmap for all the things. And you don't have to have the same answers, but you absolutely need to answer the same questions.
Right. Well, I think that's one of the things that maybe is a little overlooked by GMs in Savage Worlds who want to run their own setting, based on our homebrew discussion last week. World building is a huge part of it. You have to know how things work. What's the lay of the land in your world? If, like, for example, and I'll just throw this out here, no spoilers because I'm going to be talking a little bit about Dead End, but I'll give away a couple of spoilers as part of an example. What would happen if a classic zombie apocalypse happened today in a world where zombies never entered the zeitgeist? There was no George R. Romero movie. Nobody knew what a zombie was. The word doesn't exist. And then all of a sudden, people start rising from the dead and eating the living. You have to ask yourself, put yourself in that situation as the GM or the creator of that world and ask yourself, okay, what would the modern world response be to that? Okay, we'd probably start quarantining people first. More than likely. We'd identify it as a disease that we're not sure what's going on, and we'd quarantine people. Now, is that a good idea to quarantine people who are displaying flu-like symptoms who are probably going to die and rise again and then eat living? No, that's kind of bringing the smorgasbord when you do that. So when you do that, that's going to go horribly wrong. Hospitals are going to turn into abattoirs overnight. The worst place to be during a zombie outbreak is anywhere near a goddamn hospital. Now, then, how long does it take? Does FEMA get involved? Do they start mobilizing FEMA shelters? Do we pull in the National Guard at the beginning? Do we start trying to evacuate cities? How does that happen? What is the governmental response? At what point does the United States government go, all right, dude, game over? Let's see. This thing feeds on population. All right, we got to put an end to it. So what are the largest population centers in the country? California and the Eastern Seaboard. Tactical nuke it.
Right.
Oh, shit, that didn't work because it didn't stop the dead. Now we've got a radiated dead, and they're heading for Washington, D.C. Oh, fuck me. Okay, we have to keep a stable government. Okay, so Congress, you go over here to Area 51. We're heading over to Cheyenne Mountain, to NORAD. We're going to try to maintain. Then what happens to the military when the government's gone? So, I mean, you kind of have to ask yourself those kind of questions. What would the progression look like in a world where magic was available? Well, in order to answer that question, you have to ask yourself, what's the source of magic? What's the nature of magic? And then make sure that not only that, make sure it thematically fits your game.
Right.
That you want to play as well. What kind of tone does your game have? What kind of themes do you want to explore narratively? Here's a great one. Star Trek constantly loved this theme. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So when we're gonna play on the theme that once people get power, they want more power and they become corrupt and will do anything to get it. Okay, so does that make magic evil? No, but it makes it something everybody wants to get their hands on. So maybe governments go, nope. Like we said earlier, maybe governments go, oh, no. We have an army. We have a standing army and resources for a reason. Magic makes all of that not matter anymore. Nope, screw magic. It's illegal. If you're caught performing magic, you were dead on sight. It's a death sentence.
I want to turn this just for a moment, though, and talk about something else that I think is just as important for this discussion, but at the same time is a huge divergence from the usual play it rules as written thing that you're going to hear. The one section of the entire core rulebook that absolutely 100% requires in every game that it's ever used for the GM and the player to create their own rules is magic. It's the powers system. It requires the creation of a trapping or the selection of a trapping from the book that both the player and the game master are comfortable with. It requires that the player and the game master come to an agreement. Does that trapping affect all their powers or this one power? And when they buy the next one, they select a different trapping. The player and the GM have to agree. Do they have access to all the effects that are listed for that trapping? Or are some of those locked behind edges, hindrances, backgrounds, narrative moments, magic items you find within the game world that unlock hidden potential? All of these things roll together into the most important set of rules that you need to read is the section right above the power system that says these are examples. They're not actually really truly meant to be used as rubber meets the road play. You're not supposed to play the magic arcane background and change nothing. You're supposed to change everything.
Right.
So I'm glad you said that, Dave, because I had a GM one time. He was a little bit more creative than his players, and he required that if you took an arcane background, you couldn't have access to any of the powers until seasoned, because the entire novice rank was going through and role-playing how you come to have those powers and how you discover them.
Interesting.
I can't argue with that.
Phase.
Yeah, it was sort of like, and really, if you think about it, your character is finished at seasoned. Novice is kind of like, this is sort of the training wheels storyteller phase.
For some games, yes.
Yeah. So I thought that was cool. But there were some players that they just wanted to run around and start throwing firebolts. And they're like, wait a second, I can't run around causing this mad chaos in this small West Texas village until seasoned. And he was like, no, you have to start somewhere. You can't just be a lunatic. So I thought that was kind of fun. And yeah, you're right. A lot of times when people are getting into it, they do overlook the training wheels and sort of the limiters, like the idea of high magic lets you do anything. Well, yeah, but it's going to cost you. And if you're playing Deadlands, backlash is awful. And some of the times the backlash is just a level of fatigue, unless like you're doing something like Weird Science and it blows up, or you're doing something like psionics and it burns through your brain.
Weird Science in Deadlands is expensive.
Yeah.
Take a look at how much a piece of ghost rock costs, and then how much ghost rock you need to create the new device. It's not just, I spent my XP and bought the Edge. Okay, now go buy all the equipment and the ghost rock necessary to assemble that thing.
Well, and Dave makes a good point too, because Deadlands has done the work that he's talking about with the power system to make it fit the setting.
Yeah.
So one of the mistakes we made, because Dave and I both, let's play some Deadlands. We never played Deadlands before. We were used to the Savage Worlds version of, hey, you just name your own spells, your own trappings, choose your own powers. Got into it, started looking, went, hey, Dave, you can't actually have that. What are you talking about? Oh, yeah, that's not on the list. And it says that the trapping is this, very specifically. And we're like, really? You can't just make up your own trappings in Deadlands and pick your own powers?
Right.
That seems odd until you step back and look at the entire power system as a whole and go, oh, okay. All right, I get it. We're going for a very thematic version of Magic.
The arcane background miracles in Deadlands got split into different arcane backgrounds. And then arcane background magic got turned into this illegal form of magic that's not accepted and costs you your soul. I mean, every single arcane background was rewritten and given a full set of lore, a list of powers that were excluded from it that you couldn't use, lists of powers that were changed slightly. This power is the same power that's in core, but look, over here it does a D less damage, or it does, a wider effect or a different effect. They tweaked a lot of stuff. And that is the roadmap for what you as a GM should be doing with your player. And your player says, well, I'm going to create a mage. Okay, let's get started on creating your arcane background.
Right. Well, the other thing, too, that Deadlands does is interesting is it basically takes the superpowers, arcane background, and says, no, we're going to call that Chi Mastery, and that's ancient secrets of martial arts from the West, where you have your power is the skill. But, nobody else can take martial artist as the edge except somebody who has Chi Mastery.
Yep. Pretty like they did that. Yeah. Chi Mastery is superpowers. Now, Blessed, good grief. Blessed, they've changed at least 3 times. But
it's still one of my favorites.
It's very powerful. I would say this. It gives you a lot as a role player.
Mm-hmm.
In the hands of someone who knows the system, it's very powerful.
If you're willing to gamble, because you have access to every power, but
it could just cost you your die type and faith.
Well, yeah. Not only that, like the higher the power gets, the higher the negatives get. And I'm just gonna say, word of advice: if you ever play a Blessed in one of the original, like say the Flood, don't try greater healing. You will screw yourself.
Well, I had to say this. One of the things I did appreciate, Dave played a Blessed in a Deadlands that we were running. And I had to say kudos, because he took the Samuel L. Jackson approach to casting. Whenever he did anything narrative, he would read an actual Bible scripture.
I pulled up
like a fire and brimstone preacher.
Yep.
And thus saith the Lord. Okay, whirlwind. All right, awesome.
And to be fair, I got a Betty every time I did it. So it's one of those things that as a player, when you see that your GM has put that much effort into it, or the creator of the setting has put that much effort into it, if you go all in and put 100% buy-in to it, sit down at your next ETU game and really read those magic rules for ETU, and then have your character run the ritual for the GM, you'll get bennies. Because the GM's going to sit back and go, this is amazing, and start handing out the dog treats to keep you going down the path of what they want you doing at the table.
Yeah. All right,
if you're a GM, that's a great way to get your players to really give that 100% buy-in.
Agreed. Just in case you're ever wondering, you don't need to wait for him to play a hindrance to give him a Benny. If you want more role play out of your group, the second somebody does even the little bittiest point of doing role play, go, God damn, and throw a Benny at him. And it becomes the human nature for competition kicks in, and everybody goes, well, I want a Benny for role playing. And they will start jumping on that role play train like you will not believe. So, yeah, Bennies are awesome for it.
Then simply bait them. Hey, you've got that impulsive hindrance, and there's this giant hole in front of you. I'll give you a Benny to jump down it. Oh, you got curious? I'll give you a Benny to follow him.
You've got major habit gambling. Guy comes along and bets you $1. You can't jump down there without breaking your legs.
Right? Or you don't have to tie it. You don't have to tie it to a hindrance. You don't have to. But what Dave is saying is, if they're not playing their hindrances, then bait them. Absolutely.
Yeah, and stop and think about this for a second. Dustin has just said that what he's going to do, he's going to give your character a Benny to jump in a hole because the guy bet you couldn't do it without breaking your legs. The character's immediately going to spend the Benny to soak the wound they take from the fall damage so that they don't break their legs. That way they win the bet. You're not actually giving the player anything as a GM that they're not immediately going to hand right back to you. Right. With a big grin on their face when they do it too.
I would say this too. If your players are adverse to failure, if they hate to lose and are averse to failure, Benny bait them not to re-roll a critical. You failed that roll. Not even a critical. Ooh, you missed the shot. As they reach for the Benny, I'll give you a Benny not to re-roll that. Not to spend that Benny.
You rolled the innocent bystander rule. I'll give you a Benny to keep it.
I got to tell you this anecdote. So I was running the Savage Rifts game, and they'd reached this point where I'd done Monday Night Murderthon, and they were like hometown celebrities. And so Andy Kaufman runs out and challenges a member of the party to face him for the intergender championship. And he taunts them, and one of the guy fails, and I say, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a Benny if you accept that failure. And the guy goes, okay. Now, mind you, this is Savage Rifts, so we're talking, these guys have godlike powers. We are talking about these are like 4-color superheroes, and you get them next to a ley line, and they are like post-cosmic. So the guy runs in there, and he fights Andy Kaufman, and Andy Kaufman is basically a henchman with fast regen, and Kaufman beats the crap out of him. It is just like he kicks him in the face when he's coming in, and he aces 4 times in a row. So this like all-powerful mage has to spend, I think, 6 of his bennies just to survive a fight with a henchman, like effectively the Deadpool of the universe. But then he became like this ongoing recurring villain because, if you beat Andy Kaufman for the intergender title, Andy Kaufman comes back to win the title back. It's like the hardcore title in the 90s.
Right. Well, and I know you mentioned before too that we were talking about trappings earlier. Your bolt trapping can be a paddle ball. where the ball shoots out, hits you, then comes back to you as a paddle ball.
Oh yeah, just this ridiculous guy dressed like a jester, just hitting a paddle ball, like surrounded by coalition soldiers, and you're like, okay, what do you do? He says, like, I got him targeted, right? Like, yeah, I want to spend bolt, 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 done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna take a multi-action, -2, -4, -6, done.
Yeah, that's the beauty of Savage Worlds with trappings. So, unless there's anything else in the, well, let's talk about this. I'm seeing the note here from Jody right?
Connor.
Jody Connor.
Dustin doesn't put a space after the name and before the sentence because of the way it copies and pastes the comments off of YouTube over to our chat.
All right, Dustin, I'm going to talk to you after the show. Jody writes, I'd like to use a system where the use of magic attracts unwanted attention from a nasty type of creature, construct, or group hunts those wielding magical items to feed off the user or item, and if the PCs get in the way, maybe they should have used their magic more responsibly.
That is a valid point.
Well, I think this goes back to that whole decide what kind of world you're running. If you're running the Lord of the Rings, every time they put on the ring wraiths can see them and hone in on their location. I think it's not a bad idea, but it's not a one-size-fits-all idea either. I don't think it works in every game. And quite honestly, you have to be careful that your players don't feel like, oh, well, yeah, I know why he gave me the bag of holding, because he knows that every time I use it, I get to get slapped around by his demons, therefore I'm never going to use it. You can steal the fun out of the game if you make the best stuff in the game bad for the players all the time. If everything has a horrible offset, it's like we talked about earlier, this idea of being able to stab your character with a dagger and take a permanent wound to get some power points. Yeah, but that's not how you have to cast Bolt.
Right.
That's like how you cast Puppet, or how you get extra power points to be able to continue casting Bolt when you've run out of them. We're not saying every time the player wants to cast a Bolt, they have to stab themselves and give themselves a wound they're going to keep for 5 days. No, the balance point has to be very well measured so the players don't feel punished for using that big thing on their character sheet that's part of the reason they're playing. The fantasy your player came to the table wanting to experience is throwing fireballs. It's your job to let them throw fireballs, but put enough of a balance in there that they don't take away from the guy who wanted to shoot arrows, swing a sword, ride around on a horse, throw them on a lute that magically summons snakes.
It's the idea too. It's the same thing as like the guy who shows up with the hand buzzer and shakes your hand the first time. Okay, funny. We can all have a chuckle. That's funny. But he does it the next time you see him. He does the same thing, and then the next time, at a certain point, you're gonna go, okay, look, I'm not shaking your hand.
Right.
You've conditioned me to not want to do that because I know that there's not a good outcome.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the same kind of. It's a negative reinforcement for the thing. And now you could always say that you draw a card and some event happens. I mean, there's ways around that, but I agree with Dave where every time they use it, it shouldn't necessarily have a negative effect. And
maybe make it something that's opaque to the player, where they actually make that decision.
Right.
Hey, I'm going to activate this thing, but because I happen to have a non-face card for my initiative card, I know there's going to be a negative repercussion. Or, because my initiative is below a 5, I know I'm going to take a negative on this cast. Or because I've got a red card in initiative, I've got a heart or a diamond, I know that the power is going to cost extra power points. Or whatever your balance point is, make that something the player can actively choose with their agency whether to engage or not. The penalties should be something the the players know in advance and can make an informed decision as to whether or not their character should suffer that penalty.
Well, like we've talked about Deadlands tonight a lot, right? So there's the huckster making the deal with the Manitou, right? Actually playing out a game of poker for extra power points.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
They know the penalty is what the penalty is, and if they lose that hand of cards, what they're going to get slapped with before they make the decision to try.
I would say that it makes sense in a world that has the ability to drain power points, and where people are walking around as literal batteries, that it makes sense that there would be some predator or some opportunist going around. I would say that, I would say though, there has to be some kind of mechanic for finding them or for being aware of them. Like say if you crit fail, then something somewhere in the area is aware that you're nearby. It's like twigs snapping in the woods. You know there's a deer there while you're out hunting. You just don't know where it is. You have to look for it. So you got to warn your players. You're like, when you crit fail, there's a greater chance that one of these predators of some kind might come out of the woodwork for you. That's the cost of magic, is
that, or when you critically succeed.
Or when you critically succeed.
You've released so much power all at once that it draws more attention.
I mean, it's the gunfighter principle. It's like, oh, he's the fastest gun in the West. It's like, well, you're the most powerful mage in the East. Looks like we got to have a wizard's duel.
Right. Well, and here's the thing, too. I don't have a problem with what Jody's recommending or suggesting if it's limited to something that is a temptation to use. Like if we're talking about something that is god awfully powerful as a magic item, the ability to raise the dead, or the greater healing spell, maybe certain powers are just so powerful that they attract that kind of negative energy.
More than 4 power points,
right,
in a single cast, that sort of thing. Put a barrier of entry on it so that there's a reason why the players are willing to make that choice.
Right.
But don't make it everything.
Well, like, for example, to use the Lord of the Rings One Ring example, there's a lot of times where you see Frodo freaking out like, oh my God, oh God, I'm going to die. I should put this so nobody sees me and I can get away. But, oh, I also know when I do that, bad shit's going to happen. And if it becomes an issue where it's a Sophie's choice, then absolutely let the player know, hey, anytime you put this ring on, magically healed of anything, permanent injuries, crippling injuries. This automatically, you don't even roll. It just happens. That's what it's so powerful. It does this. However, it sends out this radar beacon to anything that's involved, demons, other magic users in the area, that there's this great power being used, and it's going to make you a target. Have fun. Use it as you will. Now you're presenting the player character with this, oh God. Our big weapon just fell in battle. There's no way we're getting out of here unless I can resurrect him. But if I slip that ring on his finger, the sky could open and a flood of demons could fall on us, and that's a bad thing for everybody. That's where I would use Jody's kind of example.
Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not saying it's bad at all. I honestly think you could use that, but you have to make sure your players understand what that does. Have a gradual scale. Bolt maybe is like a gunshot deep in the woods. You might have heard it, but you don't know where it happened. But blast is like a meteor falling in the woods. It leaves a big crater. You can see it from a distance. It was a big crash. You definitely know it was off in that direction. Puppet, on the other hand, is like a marching band walking through the woods. You definitely know where they're located, how far away they are, and what direction you need to go in to intercept them. The more powerful that thing is, the bigger the draw it puts out. Or however you decide to balance it. Maybe damage powers have a bigger beacon than functional powers. Entangle maybe is a small little, on, if I draw a card from the deck and it's a Joker, someone noticed that. But the Bolt power, if I draw a card from the deck and it's not a face card, someone noticed it. Because it's a damage power. You can set up different ways to do that and make your players make those choices. Make it an interesting part of the game rather than just a slap on the wrist for using the abilities.
Right. And just because somebody is looking for them or finds them doesn't mean it's an instant death kill scenario situation.
I think
you can just make it inconvenient.
Yeah, and maybe it just starts them being stalked or tracked or something too. It doesn't even have to be that they show up instantly.
I think in a lot of cases it comes down to what is the value of the character to whatever's tracking it. If it's another mage, maybe they're like, hey, I have a quest for you since I see you're a powerful wizard. There's this great artifact that we need. Or if it's like a king, it's like my enemies are great and I need to root them out in the court. Or maybe it's one of those corrupt noblemen that really is like, oh, there's an enemy in the court and the king needs your help to root him out. I think anytime you go, I just want to point out that if you are a king of any particular lands and you hire a guy named Wormtongue, you deserve what comes next.
So I know we've run long on this one, but I think there is a pretty valid aspect of this we haven't talked about it basically at all. However common magic is, it's just as common being thrown at the players as it is the players throwing it around. So if your player characters want to have every moistened bent handing out magical scimitars that can cut through everything to their characters, well, the orc kings and the bandit guys and everybody else is also tracking down moistened bents and getting scimitars that cut through everything. You have to think of the balance point to this doesn't always have to be those kind of costs that we've talked about earlier in the show. It could just be the more common magic is, the more common magic is.
Mm-hmm.
It's like one of those points where the players look at you and they say, why does every tower have an anti-magic field? And you look at them because it's everywhere. You just bought a magic sword in this hamlet in the middle of nowhere. Of course they're going to have anti-magic fields. They're like antivirus on your computer.
Hey, why are there magical monks in every city we go to instead of a city guard? Well, I'll just tack this onto it. I don't think enough times GMs kind of sit down. We take the easy out or the cliche thing to do in response to a player using magic. And I think an interesting thing would be like somebody who wants to be a magician and has no magical power has fixated on somebody in the party. And now they're trying to get next to them. And, oh, please let me be your apprentice. I'm gonna call this the oh God, what is it? The Incredibles, the kid.
Oh, the buddy
syndrome. Yeah, this is the syndrome effect, right?
The movie who becomes Syndrome.
So it's a great way to build up, let them, this annoying ass who has no magical talent, constantly, riding the coattails of the group, following around everywhere, getting in the way to the point where they finally tell him to go away. And then he plots this thing to get them or capture them and obtain magical powers, or the character, an NPC, is just psycho and thinks that if he keeps you locked up in a basement and drinks a pint of your blood once a week, that he'll eventually get your powers.
And what if he does?
He's read some far-flung book that tells him this.
Right. Instead of the wizard with the black capes and hats showing up and it's trading blows with you. That's the cliched easy way to go. That's the kind of like the cliched approach. have this guy just like buy you a drink in a bar. You drink it, next thing you know, you feel woozy. Everything starts to go black. The next thing you know, you wake up in his basement, chained to the wall in your skivvies.
It puts the potion on its skin, or it gets the hose again.
Exactly.
or worse yet, you find out that he's a terrible, terrible bard, and you were forced to endure his orchestra.
Right. And he sings Barry Manilow hits.
Right.
On a lute. So I'm just saying that whether you're dealing with magic, however you want to do with your magic, when you're dealing with NPCs that are magic users are going to be in the antagonist to your party, think about, well, wait, what are the 3 most common ways this goes down in most role-playing games? All right, how can I turn it on its side and twist it a new way that's narratively interesting but still achieves the same goal?
I think one last thing that we should probably touch on is obviously once magic reaches a ubiquity point where everyone has it, you're absolutely going to start getting El Cheapo magic. You're going to get, Doug's discount bin of rings that do random things. You're going to get, the pot of grab bag wands that each can be waved at somebody and do one thing. They only have one power. It only goes off once, but you can buy them for a copper piece. The ubiquity starts to allow some of the things you would see in the checkout line at your local Walmart to show up in your world. And by default, this also is going to mean, there's a absolute dearth of jukeboxes in every inn, and the bards are pissed. There's an absolute, a replacement of all farms have this farmhand that goes around automatically and milks all the cows, but every farm is also looking for a mage to fix theirs because it's been kicked by the cow because the thing's pulling on the udders too hard. Right. You're going to have magic that doesn't work all the way. It's going to be mostly good magic. It's going to save you from being mostly dead.
I love that because, pretty much you have the whole campaign setting where in order to cut corners, they hire necromancers to raise the dead to do the farm work. And they raise so many, or they're just so crappy as necromancers that the dead, they just lose control of them. And suddenly you have a fantasy zombie apocalypse where the zombies just want better wages. They're like, burns.
Very Robert Asprin-esque, right?
Right. They want to be fed some fresh meat, so they just overthrow their living masters.
Well, you could also run a very interesting campaign where magic reaches its saturation point. Your entire world is so utterly inured and dependent on it that suddenly it goes away. It just overnight stops working.
Yeah. Dead magic zones, or, all magic disappears, wild magic zones where you try to use it and it does something completely different. The other thing to look at is look at this from your Savage Rifts or your Savage Shadowrun perspective, in that there's a trade-off. Maybe magic only works if you don't use technology. The old ways restriction that we see in Deadlands, where your character absolutely has absolute control of the elements, but if they ever put on metal armor, they lose the ability to cast powers for a week. They have to go a week without touching anything metal to get back their ability to cast their powers. Or their die type erodes for every hour they're wearing it, and then it takes a day to come back. Things like that. Find interesting things to do with your world to set apart its magic system. Maybe the people who have access to magic always have the all thumbs penalty.
Yeah, that would make sense because they have to be in touch with something that normal technology users wouldn't be in touch with. They
And
have to
notice I said
specialize.
penalty. They could still take the all thumbs hindrance on top of it and just double that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Be careful with giving players a hindrance or an edge automatically across the board and naming it that edge. Find a way to work that in a different manner so that they still have that option to take it and double up.
I think if you're going to build a druid, you would probably give them the arcane background miracles and tell them, hey, it would probably be a good idea to take the all thumbs hindrance.
That might fit. I mean, you can still have a woodsman type druid, like, very mountain man, very capable with his hands kind of guy. I would just say the miracles thing, they can't wear for example, they have to wear only natural fibers.
Yeah.
It either has to come from an animal skin, so they can wear leather all day long. They can wear wool, but any man-made fabric,
Yeah,
that's
they have
a sin.
a personal problem with it.
That's a sin. Yeah, that's a sin.
Oh, there's one we need to at least address for a moment. Go reread the Miracles arcane background, and before gameplay starts, write a list of sins down for the character. Every single game I sit down to where someone has arcane background miracles, it's a free thing. They never have sins. The GM never enforces sins. It's completely whitewashed, and it makes miracles the most powerful arcane background available because suddenly there's not a backlash. There's not a drawback to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we talked about it before on the cast, but let's just touch on it real quickly. Let's say you get your powers as a miracle arcane background from the sun god. Okay, so what does your sun god require? Because you can have a list of requirements. He requires you to greet every sunrise with prayer and every sunset with prayer. An hour prayer on each side. You miss it, that's a sin.
And never open an umbrella indoors.
Right. And never, ever try to find shade from the sun. Whatever you decide are his tenets. Now, his other tenets could be too. He must spread love like sunshine or whatever, however you want to put it. He always has, or maybe he has to take a vow of poverty. Maybe he has to take a vow of silence. Maybe these are vows that are required, and then you determine when he breaks one of those vows or doesn't do one of those things, it's either a major sin or a minor sin. And those have consequences. He has to
and none of it should be automatic.
Right.
None of it should be automatic. It should always be in roleplay. If you got a character who has a tithing restriction as one of their sins, that is not they take 10% of treasure every time treasure is divvied up. It's in character during roleplay. Their character travels to a temple, reaches into their bag, and tithes 10%. Because if they don't do that, they've committed the sin and have the sin on their record and go through the full fallout of that. It absolutely has to be things the player actively has to interact with to be on this list. It doesn't need to be a tithe, but it needs to be something the player has to have their character actively do during gameplay.
Right.
And it could be something as simple as like feed the hungry, clothe the naked, be a defender of the weak. So, for example, they're down to the rations. They're like almost out of food, and the only way for your character with that quality has to break his final meal into 4 pieces to feed the other members of the party. And if he doesn't do it, it's a sin.
Yep.
If the bad guy somehow gets all of his armor taken off and is being drugged through the town naked, he has to stop that, clothe him, and defend the bad guy, because in that situation, he's naked and weak.
Right.
And all that, like Dave says, it all comes up in role play, in narrative role play situations.
So I'm going to throw this out there. I don't know if any of you are fans of the game Skyrim, but I came to the conclusion that the reason why there are so many Nordic guards in Skyrim is because they like to pick on wood elves. Here's why. If you play Elder Scrolls, you know that the wood elves have something called the Green Pact, which means that if you kill something in Valenwood, you have to eat it. Meaning that if you kill a sentient, like a Nord or a high elf or whatever, you have 3 days to commit the act of cannibalism. And pretty much every single guard in Skyrim is a guard in Skyrim because they took an arrow to the knee. Because rather than killing somebody and having to eat them in front of everybody else, they just shot the guy in the knee and ran away. Conspiracy theory for the night.
All right. Well, if we have nothing else in the chat, I think that brings us to a close.
I thought it was bad when I referenced "wow" on the podcast. I think it's around the arrow the knee meme. 2 years too late.
No, the low point of tonight's broadcast was the shit portal.
Yes.
No. That was quality merchandise right there.
Right? I mean,
hey, that's nearly as good as Baby Birdie.
You're getting this for free.
Not quite. All right. Well, we've gone a little long. Enjoy the extra bonus content, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, this is your host, Jared Savage, Daddy Gunning, for Dave and Dustin, saying keep rolling and stay savage.